Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would you like some water?
Why not?
Go on there.
Sounds like an excellent plan. I'm on. I can hear my voice. Mind you, I can normally hear my voice. So when I lecture, I can kind of project a version of my personality along with my voice. And if it bounces off the back wall, that's a good day.
Very good. Very good. We're not going to stand up for today, just saying. Just in case people are worried, we will be sedentary for this evening.
I won't.
You won't. You can now hear me. That's fantastic. I thought we were going to win. We had a rocket scientist on our table.
Yeah, but all the questions were about Shakespeare and some football club.
That's true. It was a great leveler. You are literally a rocket scientist.
I am literally a rocket scientist.
Is that on your business card, or do you?
I don't have a business card. I can't be bothered.
Okay.
Yes, I am a rocket scientist. I introduce myself at parties as, "Hi, I'm a rocket scientist." This goes down really well. My husband goes, I'm a mathematician," and that just doesn't have the same effect.
So between you and a brain surgeon, because that's the other thing, isn't it? You know, people say it's not rocket surgery.
Rocket science, rocket surgery. Now that could be quite interesting.
I'm going to get corrected a lot by the rocket scientist here. So yes, between you and a brain surgeon, who wins the intellectual battle?
Well, I really like my job because if I'm wrong, maybe 10 people in the world care and nobody dies.
Right. Yeah. Unless some of your equipment falls to the earth.
We'll talk a bit about that later on in this interview.
Yes. So tell us, what does day-to-day life look like for a rocket scientist?
Day-to-day life for a rocket scientist. I've got some pictures. If we could have... I have this really subtle way of changing slides.
There we go.
Right, okay, I'm a rocket scientist. I've worked for every major space agency on the planet, apart from the Russians. Maybe that's a good plan. So I started out doing my PhD in black holes. I do black holes. And then I went and worked for NASA, and we flew an experiment in the payload bay of the space shuttle. I was in the control room wearing the snazzy headset, controlling where our telescope pointed.
So your telescope was like an X-ray telescope?
In the payload bay of that space shuttle.
What was that space shuttle?
One that's since blown up. But there you go, space.
Is that a Challenger?
Don't do space if you can't handle risk.
Okay.
So,
wow. Was that your fault? Or
No.
No, okay.
No. But we'll come on to other things later.
Okay.
So the reason people say, well, what are you doing with rockets? Because actually what I do is I do black holes, which is another really cool way to introduce yourself at parties. Hi, I'm a rocket scientist and I study black holes. Honestly, I do. This is my day job.
It must be hard to detect a black hole.
In fact, there's this great quote from Red Dwarf, which goes, black holes, you see your basic space color is black, and the black hole, your basic color of a black hole is black. So how are you meant to see them? Looking for a black hole on the black background of space, just don't go there. It's way too hard. So I don't do that.
Okay.
Instead, most stars actually, they hang out with their friends. Our sun is a bit kind of, loner.
Okay.
Somewhere on the spectrum.
Okay.
Just kind of in a corner without any friends. But most stars actually are in binary systems. And then if one of those stars comes to the end of its life, collapses to become a black hole, the companion star can be lunch.
Oh, really? So our star, our sun is actually quite unique in being by itself. It's more usual to have binary.
Yeah, about half of stars have binaries. So.
Okay, all right.
So then you can have material that falls off the companion star and falls towards the black hole. And you all know what happens when things fall under gravity. I will use this. This could all go hideously wrong.
Okay.
Dong. Yeah, when things fall under gravity, they fall.
That's science, people, right there. Science.
Yes. My husband, who is a mathematician, sometimes still looks confused when things fall down.
Is he pure mathematics?
He is a very pure mathematician.
Right, okay. Yeah.
And So when things fall under gravity, you can get energy out. That's how hydroelectric power plants work. Only the amount of energy you get from things falling towards a black hole is just enormous.
But what actually is a black hole?
It's just gravity. So it's completely, utterly extreme gravity.
Okay.
So you can make the Earth into a black hole if you squashed it.
Don't try this at home, people. Okay, but...
No, try it.
Give it a go.
Because you'd have to squash the entire Earth between my thumb and forefinger.
Okay.
Less than a centimetre.
Right.
And you'd make it where gravity was so strong that not even light could escape, and so then it would be very dark and it would be a black hole.
Okay. And are there any black holes in our part of the Milky Way, or like?
The nearest one we know of is something like 2,000 light years away.
Okay. Wow.
It's really local.
And you detect them how?
Good question. So we detect them. So from this material that's falling down. So you're getting gravitational energy out. The black hole itself is very black, but the material coming in, there's so much gravitational energy, it's heating up, not just red hot or even white hot, but X-ray hot. Okay. So it's like glowing, intensely luminous halo of X-rays, highlighting the position of the black hole that you can't see.
Okay. Now, if you were to move your microphone just
then it
an
would stop.
inch that way. Is that
boosting,
better?
Yes.
Is that better?
That probably is much better on the desk. Is that better on the desk?
Yeah, we've got a thumbs up.
Good. Yeah.
Okay.
So then you want to look at the sky with X-ray eyes because you want to find these bright X-ray hot disks. So if you look at the sky with X-ray eyes, you see nothing.
Right.
Absolutely nothing, because our atmosphere is completely opaque to X-rays.
Okay.
Which means you've got to go above the atmosphere.
Hence
and
the rockets.
That means you get to play with rockets.
Wow.
Fab. So this is why I'm a rocket scientist, because to study black holes, they're easier to find when they're surrounded by this luminous X-ray halo. And to see X-rays, you've got to get above the atmosphere, and then you have to play with rockets.
That's pretty fun. So you're not involved in getting rockets up into the outer atmosphere. You're actually involved in them pointing.
Yes,
the
I'm
telescope.
involved in the instruments that they carry.
Okay. So tell us what was exciting about the being in the control room and launching.
What is not exciting about being in the control room at NASA and pointing your telescope at various things? But it was quite an interesting mission anyway. Many things went slightly wrong. One of their terminals on board the space shuttle failed with a burning smell, and a fire on board the shuttle is instantaneous, mission abort, deorbit.
Yeah.
So they just kind of closed that terminal down and decided they didn't really smell that. No.
Right.
And then the toilet blocked.
The toilet?
The toilet blocked.
Okay.
And
This was a manned flight?
Yes, it's a shuttle. Shuttle is
right. Okay.
has astronauts on.
Okay.
And you think of astronauts as being really, really kind of tough, but their loo had blocked, and so they were coming down. But as they were coming down, packing up the instruments, we'd had some trouble pointing our telescope. And eventually we couldn't quite control it on a slew, and it slammed into its latch. And so now it's pointing at a funny angle in the payload bay of the shuttle, and we can't move it anymore. Right. And so they pack everything away, and the shuttle pilot goes, yeah, we're hotshots, we'll point it for you. What do you want us to look at? We can point the shuttle and do your pointing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a bit rubbish, but it was really fun.
Yeah, great. I'd have pointed at my house. That'd be fun, wouldn't it?
We prefer to look up rather than down.
Right, okay. That's why you're the scientist.
That's why we're the scientists, yes. So this is, I got to live my dream. When I was growing up, which is the next picture, I'm really subtle, you can tell. This is me at 11.
Okay. Wow.
And
you have not changed a bit. Look at that.
I know. Look at that. It's not that bad. And at 11, actually, I did want to be a rocket scientist.
Wow.
Because on the TV in the 70s, there wasn't much on TV in the 70s, but there was Star Trek.
Wow.
To boldly go. They would have adventures. Oh, adventure in the 70s in a small town. That was hard to come by.
Because it was Folkestone in Kent.
Folkestone in Kent.
Okay.
And it's just a normal small town. And in the 70s, there's not even anything on the TV to watch. There's only 4 channels. I know they kind of find that hard to believe nowadays, but... But yes, so then what there was on the next slide, Star Trek. I wanted to be Spock. I wanted to be the one who understood things. Because actually, he was the one who always rescued them. He was the one who understood what was going on.
Because he had Vulcan blood in him.
Absolutely.
So he was cool
he understood
and calculating.
everything apart from emotion, which when you're a teenager is perfectly understandable because emotion is completely...
Too much.
What just happened?
It's too much. Yeah. And so Spock and Star Trek is making you think you want to boldly go where
I
no
want
one's
to
gone
have a
before.
life of exciting adventure and rockets and black holes.
Yes. Okay.
And I got to live the dream.
And so you've always been a very good maths kind of a person and sciencey and all that sort of stuff.
I always wanted to be good at it, so I worked really hard at it.
Okay.
And
And growing up, was there a faith component in your family growing up at all? Or?
Not particularly. When I decided I wanted to be Spock, wanted to be the science, I had kind of grown up thinking that scientists had to be atheists. I'm not sure it was actually ever said in the culture, but it's in our culture that scientists have to be atheists. And so, well, I didn't really have particularly a faith to give up, so I wasn't that fussed.
Yes. But when you had sort of Christian friends at school, you tended to think what?
I thought they were nuts.
Okay.
And so we would have discussions in our sixth form, and I would win because they couldn't argue for toffee. Not because they weren't right or they didn't have a good point of view, but they couldn't kind of string enough thoughts together to argue.
And then age 17, a friend of yours wanted to go the whole hog with the whole Christian thing and get baptized and everything. And you said you'd go along to the church. What did you encounter?
I encountered something I had never actually seen before. I'd been in churches before where people kind of stood there and shuffled their feet and mumbled whatever prayers they were mumbling or sang in a kind of half-hearted, very British, embarrassed way. This was not a church like that at all. This was a church where people were just dramatically worshipping God, like they didn't care who was watching them. And really, it was something I had never seen before.
What did you think, though, really?
They were nuts.
Yeah.
But it was quite dramatic to see.
Yes.
And in the middle of this, there's something almost like a voice behind my left shoulder going, so I don't exist, do I? I'm going, no, go away. Groaning at the logical inconsistency of talking to someone who doesn't exist. Okay. But of course, I can rationalize this. That woman scientist. Religion has a very powerful hold over us. Psychologically, I'm as dodgy as the rest of the human race because despite my best efforts to be Spock, I am actually human. So it's just religion has this powerful psychological hold over us over however many hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. And so I just put it down to this is me being as psychologically dodgy as the rest of the human race. Now, I may well be as much, if not more, psychologically dodgy than the rest of the human race, but to make myself feel better, I thought I'd go and argue with the pastor after the service. So I went up to him and told him what a bad idea Christianity was, and he let me rant, probably at length. I was 17. Have some mercy on me. And then he asks what I recognize now as being the classic question. He says, well, that's very interesting. Who do you think Jesus was? What do you think about Jesus? And I now recognize that this is the classic question. And I come out with the classic answer, which is good teacher. Because surely he was a good teacher, all the Gospels about his teaching. And he said, that's interesting, because he went around saying he was God.
Yeah.
And accepting people's worship.
Right.
Which is deeply disturbing,
Yes.
actually, when you think about it. I mean, I don't know about you, but me, if someone comes to you and goes, thank you so much, oh Lord, I am unworthy. I mean...
Yeah, it's embarrassing, but you know...
Finally, someone has recognized.
Years,
yeah,
but,
that's right. It's just, it's just deeply...
Yeah, it's odd.
How could anyone allow people to do that? I mean, was he a nutter? Was he just deluded? Maybe he was just kind of manipulating people. Maybe he knew he wasn't God, but was allowing them to think he was God. And if you're not going to tick any of those two boxes, how about him being God?
Yes. Yeah.
And I was just floored. Not only had I had a deeply disturbing day, but I had now met someone who could argue better than I can. And at 17, that was really disturbing.
So that whole thing, who is Jesus? If he makes those claims about himself, he's either lying to himself, or he's lying to you, or he's telling the truth.
Yeah.
And you couldn't find your way out of that trilemma.
Oh, I could.
Okay.
Oh, I could. You see, it wasn't Jesus who wrote the Gospels. It was his disciples. So maybe Jesus didn't actually think these things. Maybe it was his disciples looking back on it and just trying to make sense of everything that had happened. So I thought, right, okay, let's go with that one. But this pastor had given me a whole load of books about evidence. Evidence for Jesus being who he said he was. Evidence for Jesus being the Son of God. And yes, it taught a little bit about his teaching and about the way he lived, but it was really all focusing on his death and saying, well, actually, the disciples, the people who caused the Gospels to be written, they talk about actually his death and resurrection as being the main point, not the teaching so much as dying and being raised from the dead. I mean, how...
It's not what you expect from just a good teacher, right?
It's not what you expect from just a good teacher. And it's really not what you expect from a bunch of...
uneducated fishermen and tax collectors. And
I mean, people don't normally... don't get me wrong, religion, people can come out with all sorts of ridiculous things that they believe, obviously, passionately. But normally they're not. So in the end, I decided I could imagine the disciples running away when Jesus was arrested, running away when he's being crucified, dying in pain. I could imagine them being racked with guilt afterwards. I could imagine them thinking, we let down our friend, the person we called Lord. We abandoned him, we let him down in his hour of greatest need. And I could imagine them feeling so guilt-ridden that eventually they would stand up in the marketplace and say, this Jesus you crucified was a good teacher, a prophet showing us the way to God. That's not what they said. By their own admission, what they said when they stood up in the marketplace was, this Jesus you crucified got up from being dead and we had breakfast with him the other day.
Which is kind of like, for a scientist, that's like a falsifiable claim, isn't
It's a falsifiable claim, but how do you falsify it 200 years, 2,000 years in the future, 2,000 miles away? How do you get evidence? I'm a scientist. Let's have evidence. So I thought, okay, evidence. Well, it seemed clear that the body wasn't still in the tomb because the authorities didn't want trouble. And as soon as the disciples stand up and say these ridiculous things, if the body's in the tomb, you just drag them out and go, Jesus, alive, you had breakfast with him. Funny, looks a bit dead to me. I mean, they're not really very subtle. They would just have pinned him up on the walls. And
the Romans are brutal like that.
They were efficient. They didn't want trouble. They wanted taxes.
Yeah.
So the body wasn't in the tomb. So where was it? Okay. The disciples. Maybe the disciples stole it.
Right.
But then they'd have known that he was dead. Mm-hmm. So they're not likely to stand up and say, this Jesus you crucified, we had breakfast with him, he's alive, we'll die some horrible death for this thing that we know is a lie. Mm-hmm. Didn't really sound terribly psychologically plausible. Mm-hmm. So, body not in the tomb. If the disciples didn't steal it, maybe someone else stole it. Mm-hmm. But then why do the disciples say he's alive? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe then someone else stole it and the disciples had a mass hallucination. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, in science, You're not meant to, I call it, you're not allowed to have the tooth fairy twice. You're allowed to have one unusual thing happen, but the more unusual things you have to stack up.
Yeah. Plus, mass hallucinations don't really happen. Individual hallucinations can happen, but 500 people having the same hallucination.
It was a little hard to imagine a tax collector with a hallucination. Fisherman? I don't know. But a tax collector.
But yeah, 500 at once seemed,
Just didn't seem desperately. Whereas the explanation that the disciples give in the Bible as to why they changed from running away to being emboldened to go out and change the entire world is that they'd met with Jesus.
Right.
Who had been raised from death to life. And yes, I can see that would change your perspective on a lot of things.
Right.
And I could see, as a scientist, I weigh evidence. The most likely solution is the one that best explains all the data.
But, okay, so you're 17 years old, or in the years after this, you're processing this, and you think the most likely historical scenario is that Jesus rose from the dead. But come on, Chris, like dead people don't rise. And if you're a scientist, you can't hang anything on a miracle, can you?
Well, this was something that always annoyed me, even in my atheist days. People who believe in God, they've already said that the natural world is not all there is.
Right.
And so why they had any problem with any miracles happening, I just had no idea. Because once you have said the natural world is not all there is, once you have said there is a God, well, the God who made the rules can break them. Mm-hmm. The fact he doesn't normally is merely, I think, an aspect of his faithfulness. Mm-hmm. But he made them. He can break them. Right. And even in my atheist days, this was something that completely annoyed me, that that once you have a God, you have a supernatural dimension. Miracles can happen. Mm-hmm. If Jesus is the Son of God, God can raise him to life.
Right.
That's not a...
And that doesn't destroy science because it's a miracle because it's irregular. And it's the irregularity of it makes the miracle. But it assumes the regularity of nature, which is what your science depends on.
Yes.
So it's not a science killer
to
believe in miracles.
No, miracles are not in any way... Once you have said there is a God, then miracles can happen.
Yeah.
And that's just the bottom line.
Yeah. So what was this doing to your personal faith? So you can come to the end of a syllogism and you can come to the conclusion of an argument, but what does it do for you personally to start to think, oh, Jesus might have risen from the dead?
Oh, I looked in horror at this mounting evidence and thought, if I was convinced by evidence, I would let this convince me. But I'm 17 and there is no way I can be wrong, because what 17-year-old can ever be wrong? But it's hard to live that way. If actually you've been intellectually convinced by the argument, it's not proof. It's evidence. But very little in life is actually based on proof. Even pure mathematicians. Is anyone here a pure mathematician? Excellent, good. Even in pure mathematics, where you derive everything very formally, there are 6 axioms that you start with that are not provable. You build it up from there with proofs, but your proofs stand on something which cannot be proved. Even in pure maths. And in physics, it's we build on evidence. And we have enormous amounts of evidence for most of what we do. Obviously, the closer you get to real research, it gets a little more interesting.
Sure.
But we build with evidence rather than proof.
And the evidence was pointing to the fact that Jesus beat death, and for you that was a supernatural claim about his identity. He's more than a good teacher. He's the Son of God, conqueror of death. And did it all just...
But I didn't want it to be true.
Okay.
Because that would mean I was wrong, which is awful. And secondly, it would mean that there was a God who cared how I lived. I didn't want there to be a God who cared how I lived. I wanted to make my own rules. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So there's a conflict going on. I can see the evidence is pointing me this way, but I don't want it to be true.
So what's going to persuade you?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think that's a really important question. If you're here and you've been looking at the claims of Jesus, what would persuade you? And actually, if the answer is nothing, I would say that that's not being intellectually honest. And so eventually I decided, okay, I don't like this, but I have been convinced grudgingly by the evidence. Now, if I was God, and your prayer of faith, you're meant to say, Jesus, thank you for dying for me. Thank you for taking my sin so that I can come and know the love of God. Thank you. No. I'm going, okay, I guess. I guess you exist. Bah. I mean, if I'd been God, lightning bolt, pile of ash on the floor, smoking gently. But God seemed to think it would do for a start. Right. And we'd go on from there.
Right. And then the personal dimension of faith sort of was a slower burn for you.
That's right, because even though in my exploration, some of the books I'd been reading, some of the people I'd been talking to, they made it clear that Christianity wasn't just this mental, intellectual assent to a set of beliefs. They were talking about it being a personal relationship. But I didn't know how to think about that. So it was a surprise to me that actually becoming a Christian, life looked different. That just walking home, I remember looking at the sky, and it was the same sky. And before, it had just shown me beauty, the beauty of the physical world. But now it seemed to be pointing to the beauty of a God I was just getting to know.
It all became personal.
And it became a little more personal. And things like this idea of God caring how you lived. So obviously I was getting quite good grades. And I'm thinking, okay, now I'm a Christian, I should help people.
Okay.
God doesn't need me to explain how the universe works. I should go and be a doctor and help people.
Okay, right. Yeah.
So I'm praying about this, and Jesus is going, oh God, please no. So he managed to convince me that he knew me and he'd made me, and I'd make a rubbish doctor. Right. But I might have the makings of a good astrophysicist. So maybe I should just go and do astrophysics and keep away from ill people.
But that seems a very healthy view, that the God who is behind this universe actually quite wants us to explore his universe, and that actually a belief in him might make us ever more eager to go into the laboratory and explore.
And absolutely. One of the things I find, I do space, and so to some extent, I have a grip on how big the universe is. As in, I know I don't have a grip on how big the universe is. It is incredibly immense. It may be truly spatially infinite. And I look at pictures of galaxies, and I look at pictures of distant galaxies out towards the edge of time. And how much bigger a picture does that give us of the God who made it than, say, in medieval times when they thought the stars were 10 miles above our head, this crystal sphere, and the stars were where there were little tears in the fabric, and so it was the light of heaven coming through. Yeah, 10 miles above your head, and it's the light of heaven coming through. That's very lovely. Okay, now let's think about potentially spatially infinite universe. Which one of them gives you a bigger picture of God, of the God who made it?
So for you, you're giving me the sense that a bigger picture and a bigger understanding of science does not drive God into the corners, the God of the gaps.
Absolutely
as
not.
People think
No,
of.
the more you know about, the more you discover about the universe, the more you discover our sun is one of 100,000 million stars, like the sun. Some a bit bigger, some a bit smaller, tied together by gravity into this beautiful spiral galaxy that we call home. And that beautiful spiral galaxy is one of something like 100,000 million other galaxies in the observable universe, each with 100,000 million stars, like the sun, maybe a bit bigger, maybe a bit smaller.
Right.
Which one gives you a bigger picture of God?
Yes. And when people like Kepler and Copernicus were kind of looking at the orbits of the planets and that sort of thing, it didn't make them think, now we've got an equation, therefore we don't need God.
No,
they said,
no,
we're thinking God's thoughts after him.
Yes.
And that's the fun that you get to do as an astrophysicist.
Absolutely.
Okay. So you went to university, was at St Andrews?
Yes.
And then doctorate at Cambridge?
Yes.
And then to
then
Durham?
I worked, no. Then I worked for NASA. Then I came back and worked in the Space Science Group in Leicester.
Okay.
Then I went to Durham. And then I had a sabbatical year in Tokyo working for the Japanese Space Agency.
Okay. Oh.
So while I was working for the Japanese Space Agency, we were flying a satellite with a new X-ray telescope on board. And I had organized to go to Japan for a sabbatical year. My husband had organized he would come for a sabbatical year, and he'd organized his graduate student to come for the year as well. An hour before we get on the plane, I get an email saying they had lost contact with the satellite.
Oh.
Now, this isn't good news, but it's not necessarily bad news. These things can happen. You can just yell loudly at your satellite and it goes, oh, you mean the antenna should be pointing that way? Right, okay. So we go to the airport, change planes in Charles de Gaulle. In Charles de Gaulle, I get an email saying the orbit of our satellite had changed. Oh. It's really hard to change the orbit of your satellite. If the orbit has changed, something devastatingly bad has happened. So I am sitting on a 12-hour flight, emigrating, knowing the reason that I had gone to Japan has just fallen out of the sky.
Wow.
So I arrive on the day they lose contact with the satellite. Okay. It is hard to imagine a worse first day on the new job. And clearly everyone is struggling for meaning in all of this. But actually I ranted at God. I said, couldn't I just have one day? Just one day of my beautiful new satellite data. Wow. Couldn't I just have had one day of the excitement?
At least you knew it wasn't your fault, though.
Well, yes, that did help.
Yeah.
But I just felt that in terms of I was working in the group who had built the satellite. They were the people responsible for it. And on what must have been actually the worst day of their working life, the person who walks in the door is me. And they say, have your plans changed? And I go, no, actually, because the rest, this is done. I've organised my year. My husband's organised his year. I can't go back and leave him here. He can't go back with me because his grad students. This is not fixable, not changeable. We are staying here for a year. We are with you. And I think to have someone on what is the worst day of your life say, okay, I'm with you for the year. I found a bit more meaning in that.
And you found your Christian faith kind of gave you the resources to do that.
Keep going in a clueless fashion, yes. But one of the things I can find is that I'm sure no one here has noticed, but I'm a bit different. I mean, there aren't many astrophysicists lurking around, and rocket scientists who live in Japan and work for NASA, but who are also Christians as well. And so sometimes my colleagues at work just think I'm a bit odd because I'm a Christian. Sometimes Christians find me a bit odd because I'm a scientist. And sometimes there can be some hesitancy about that. How does that work? How do you see God working in creation? I'm also a kind of out there feminist, and I do leadership, and just sometimes I seem a bit too much for people, or not enough. It's one or the other, or both simultaneously, but I'm never what they want to see.
Right.
And that can be a little wearing sometimes. But it's another of these kind of personal relationship with God moments and what sort of difference that makes. So at one point when I was feeling outside of everyone's experience, I just kind of felt Jesus come and say, Chris, do you understand gravity? And I'm going, no. If you thought about gravity every day for the rest of your life, would you understand gravity? I do think about gravity every day. I do black holes. But no, I understand a lot about gravity, but I know that fundamentally, I don't really understand. And he goes, would that change the fact that your feet stick to the floor? I'm going, no. He goes, do you understand my love? And I'm going, no, but I'm not thick, and I can see where this conversation is going. If you thought about my love every day for the rest of your life, would you understand it? Nope. Would that change the fact that I love you? Something changed in me at that point. And I understood and just got a little bit of a grip that we are loved by God. That it's really not about what we do, that He loves us, and that's the point.
Gives you the security to go and be Chris Doan.
Absolutely. Right? And sometimes you need God behind you because you walk into a room and it'll, sometimes too much and not enough.
Yeah. No, I love that. The security of being loved frees you to go and be who you are. Time has flown, absolutely flown. We're about to have a cake break in a second. But one last question for you, which is, if people are weighing up the evidence, and we've seen that evidence itself is not enough to kind of make you joyfully receive Jesus as Lord, but can you give just a little bit of encouragement as to if someone's thinking, is Jesus the one? Do I want him in my life? Can you give them some encouragement as to why they might want this stuff to be true?
That's actually, I did not want it to be true when I was 17 and was looking at the evidence, but with hindsight, knowing I am loved by God frees me to be Chris on a much more fundamental level than I would ever have had the freedom to be when I was my militant atheist, no one comes near.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's available for anyone. Absolutely available for anyone. Brilliant. Well, while you have cake, why don't you turn to your neighbor and ask them, does a grander, larger view of the universe give you a smaller view of God or a bigger view of God? Okay, a bigger view of the universe, should that give you a bigger view of God or a smaller view of God? What do you think? And while you do that, why don't we give a big round of applause for Chris Stone? Thank you so much. And I'll be back in about 5 minutes. Let's enjoy some cake.
In the beginning there was light and life and love, a Father loving his Son in the joy of the Holy Spirit. And everything has come from light and life and love. But we look today at the world and we see it's not like that. We see a world full of darkness and death and disconnection. Where's that come from? Well, we've turned from the light. And when you turn from light, where else do you go but darkness? When you turn from love, where else do you go but disconnection? When you turn from life, where else do you go but death? But then what does love do when love sees the beloved in trouble? Love says, your pit will be my pit. Your debts will be my debts. Your darkness will be my darkness. Your death will be my death. So who is Jesus? He's the Son of the Father who came as our brother to be with us in the darkness, to take that darkness on himself, that death, that disconnection that we all deserve for turning from God. He took it on himself on the cross. He plunged it down to the hell that it deserves. And he rose up again to light and life and love. And he says, you in the darkness, do you want my light? You in death, do you want my life? You in disconnection, do you want my love? And anyone who turns and says yes to Jesus, we now belong to him. We get his Father as our Father. We get his Spirit as our Spirit. We get his future as our future. It's for free and it's forever. So do you want Jesus?
Great. Wow. Plenty of chances to keep those conversations going. I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about that same Jesus that Chris was encouraging us about, that same Jesus who loves us and gives us that security to run off into the world and maybe be a doctor or maybe be a rocket scientist or an astrophysicist, maybe discover something about the far reaches of the universe or something about molecular cell biology or something, I don't know. The kind of God that we're talking about is not a God of the gaps who shrinks as we learn more and more about the universe, but the God of the whole show who invites us to discover more about his world. So as we come to the end of a great week of events, maybe you've been coming along to a number of different events, and maybe you still have all sorts of questions about Christian faith. And I just want to say a word about questions, because questions are brilliant. Questions are wonderful. We want questions. The way you come to faith is not really with a clipboard and a pen and 17 questions, each more tricky than the last. And the process of coming to faith is not about ticking off every objection until you finally have no more objections and now you're a dead-eyed slave and you can be a Christian forever. Okay, that's not what Christianity is. I think Christianity is a lot like a human relationship. Right? You know, the way you get to know a human partner is not with a clipboard and a pen and 17 questions, each more difficult than the last. If that's the way you're looking for a girlfriend or boyfriend, that might be why you're still single, okay? It's not really how things work, okay? If you want to get to know somebody, what do? You enter into their world, they enter into your world, and along the way you ask questions. But maybe you get to the point where you want to commit to this person. Maybe you want to jump in with both feet and commit for life. Maybe you even want to marry the person. And when you get married to the person, is that because you know everything about this other person? No, which is what makes the first year of marriage so very interesting. You see, it's on the inside of the relationship that all the questions really start to be asked. Like, who raised you? Why would you do things like this? I can't believe I've done it. Maybe it's just my marriage, but that's... The questions do not end when you enter the relationship. The way you get into the relationship is not by answering all your questions, and the questions do not end when you get into the relationship. Maybe the questions really start to bite. They really start to matter when you're on the inside of the relationship. And I've found that to be true with Jesus. I've got questions now that are more serious, that matter to me a lot more now that I'm in the relationship. Being with Jesus doesn't end the questions. So don't feel like tonight you have to have ticked off all your questions about Christian faith before you could ever commit to coming to church or even taking that step of receiving Christ tonight. You don't need to answer all your questions. You just need to know, do I know enough about this person to trust them with all the stuff I don't know yet? It's the same with a relationship. You don't need to know everything about that other person. You just need to know, is this the sort of person who, when other question marks are raised, I can kind of trust them with all the things that I don't know? You can do that with Jesus. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to tick off every question on your sheet. The other thing I'd love to say as a kind of an introductory remark is this idea that science and faith are enemies. We really need to get rid of that idea. I just don't see that that's true at all. And to demonstrate this truth, I want to tell you a story about Betty the botanist. Can we see Betty the botanist on the screen? I want to tell you the story about Betty just today. There she is doing her great botany, and in comes Gareth the lab technician. Let's see Gareth the lab technician. Just this morning, Gareth came in and Betty had been beavering away at her botany all night. And she says to Gareth the lab technician, Gareth, I just thank you so much for that botanical specimen that you gave me yesterday. It's been so helpful. I was fascinated by it. I did all these spectral analyses of the botanical specimen, and I've discovered whole ecosystems living on the leaves that have never been before discovered. I've mapped its genome, which is a first for this species. I've even discovered pharmacological properties that are going to help us in the fight against Alzheimer's. Gareth, I can't thank you enough for giving me that botanical specimen yesterday. Have you got it yet? Gareth says, Betty, yesterday, it was the 14th of February, Valentine's Day. It was a long-stemmed rose, Betty. Do you understand what I gave to you? Well, that's a question, isn't it? Does Betty understand what Gareth gave to her on February the 14th? On one hand, she understands that rose better than anyone. She's mapped its genome, for goodness sakes. She knows more things about that rose than anyone has ever known about roses before. On one hand, does Betty know the rose? She knows it backwards. She knows it inside out. She has exhaustive scientific knowledge of the rose. On the other hand, does she understand what Gareth gave to her? No, she is a moron. Because that rose is not just a botanical specimen, right? That rose is a romantic gesture as well. And there's no competition between it being a botanical specimen on the one hand and a romantic gesture on the other hand. It's both, isn't it? The rose can both be a botanical specimen that can be studied, that can be investigated according to all the tools that we have at our disposal. But simply to map its genome is not to exhaust the meaning of the rose, is it? And there's not a better microscope that she needs in order to figure out the romantic gesture, is there? If she's going to understand the romantic gesture, she's going to have to step away from the laboratory just for a bit and come into human society and understand something about interpersonal relationships and gifts and givers and meaning and significance. But all those levels of meaning and significance, they are not described by the scientific endeavor. That doesn't mean the scientific endeavor is useless. It's wonderful. It's incredibly useful. But to understand the rose biologically is not to understand it as a romantic gesture. You're going to need different kinds of tools to think about that rose in different kinds of ways. Now, what if the world is like that rose? If the world is like that rose, then go into the laboratory and please, for the love of God, study it, investigate it, explore it for all it's worth. Oh my goodness. God would want you to explore his love gift and exhaustively try to understand what he has given to you. But he also wants you to understand it as a love gift, right? Because if the world is like that rose, then maybe it's a communication from someone who's trying to tell you they love you. And wouldn't it be a shame if all you ever did was go into the laboratory and map the genome and completely miss the love? See, science and faith are not competitors any more than the rose is either a botanical specimen or a romantic gesture. Science and faith just are not competitors in any way, shape, or form. And I hope that introducing you to Chris this evening has just shown you, like, if you think science and faith are at war, what do you do with Chris? What do you do with any of the scientists in this room? And the Christian Union is full of scientists, right? Who don't see their faith as excluding their scientific study, but see their faith as propelling them into the laboratory to try and figure out all they can about this wonderful romantic gesture that God has given to us. Well, how are you going to do that? How are you going to understand the world according to this other way of understanding? How are you going to understand it as a romantic gesture? Well, this is why we've given you these Mark's Gospels. What you've got on your tables here are biographies of Jesus. And he really is a love gift who has come to planet Earth from the giver of the great gift, who wants to introduce us to the great love. And our great hope over this week and then in the weeks that follow with the follow-up course that people are doing is we want you to encounter the one who has loved you. We want you to encounter this Jesus. And the way that you're going to do that is the way it happened with Chris is she started to think, who is this Jesus? And she realized he couldn't just be a good teacher. He can't just be a good teacher given all the things that he says about himself. He is older than the universe. He is the forgiver of your sins. He's going to wrap up history at the end of all things. He is the image of God on planet Earth. You know, he accepts worship from people. He's not just a good teacher. If you think that Jesus is just a good teacher, that only shows that you are not a good listener. Just listen to what he's saying. He doesn't give you the option of just thinking that he is a good teacher. The Bible says that he is Lord, that Jesus is Lord. And actually what we've tried to do is show you from the Bible that Jesus is Lord. He's tops, he's head honcho, he's the numero uno, he's the big cheese, he's it, right? And we've wanted to show you that Jesus is Lord, that he's it, that he is ultimate reality come to earth. Because actually the Bible says when you really get that, when it really clicks into place that Jesus is Lord, it's like, bad luck, you're a Christian. It sneaks up on you like that, right? It's one of those realizations that you go, oh gosh, everything's got to change now, doesn't it? If Jesus is ultimate reality, right? The Bible's logic works like this. Jesus is Lord because if Jesus isn't Lord, if he isn't tops, then death is Lord. Okay, that's kind of the logic in the Bible, right? And it's hard to argue with this kind of logic, right? Death has never lost a battle, ever, right? It's like that ultimate bad guy at the end of a computer game, right? You know the old school computer games. Like I remember Double Dragon. That's going back way into the mist of back in the 1900s. People, there was this game called Double Dragon, and you could get through 90% of it just by doing this, and you know. All the way through. There was only like 2 moves that you could do. It was that standard of kind of platform game. But you know these kinds of games. And by the end of level 1, you face a big bad boss, right? And if you beat the big bad boss, then you get to level 2. And you get through level 2, and there's a big bad boss at the end of level 2. And if you get through the big bad boss, then level 3, level 4, level 5, and then all the way up to level 20 or whatever it was. And that final big bad boss was, bulletproof and radioactive and triple-headed and this monstrous thing that was unkillable, basically. Never loses a battle. But if you're able to kill that big bad boss, then I guess you are Lord, right? Let's put it back in those biblical terms. Now, who is the level 20 big bad boss? Death, right? Death has never lost a battle. Everyone has to go up against death, and death always wins, okay? And that's not just a personal tragedy. It is a personal tragedy, but it also means that death robs you and me of the people we love the most in life. It robs us of hope. It robs us of joy. It robs us of meaning and satisfaction to think that even the lips of my children will be dust one day. It robs you of so much, does death. And the Bible says, it wins. Therefore, it is Lord until or unless someone beats it. Step forward, Jesus, right? Jesus comes to planet Earth, and what you will read if you pick up this Mark's Gospel is you will see the one who claims to be Lord, and you think, is he up to the challenge? Could he possibly take on the big bad level 20 monster and win? Could he possibly do that? And if you read through Mark's Gospel, what you're basically seeing is Jesus takes on level 1. He takes on temptation, right? And you and I are suckers for temptation, right? We always fall for temptation. And Jesus somehow resists temptation. He gets through level 1. You're like, oh, this is tasty. Maybe he's the one. And then, you read through to chapter 2 and he starts taking on sickness and he starts healing people, and sickness gets the better of you and me. And yet Jesus somehow is able to reverse sickness in these healings. And you think, oh, he's beaten the second big bad boss. And then he takes on the chaotic forces of nature. There's this great story here in Mark's Gospel where a storm blows up at sea and all the disciples think they're going to die. And Jesus just says, quiet, be still. And a hurricane is flattened. And you think, whoa, that is incredible. Could he be the one? And that's what the question that you should be asking as you read through Mark's Gospel. I'd love you to pick this book up and keep on reading and just think to yourself, could he be the one as he takes on all these bad bosses? And then you get to Mark chapter 15, and there he really does take on the big bad boss of death. And it looks like he loses, right? It looks like on Good Friday he's down for the count and he's not getting up. And it's like, oh, how disappointing. Like imagine that you're there in quicksand. You know those really old films and like these black and white movies and someone like falls into quicksand and then the camera pans off to where the rescue is going to be and then it comes back and the person's a little bit further down. And then the camera goes off and the person's a little bit further down. And then the camera goes off and the person's a little bit further down. And the camera goes off and there's just a hat on top. And that's it. They've just sunk down into quicksand. Just imagine you're there sinking into quicksand. That's our life, isn't it? Sinking into quicksand. We think we're climbing up in the world, but you're all getting older. We're all getting older, I tell you that much. I've gotten to the age where I go to the doctor now, and they stop trying to fix you. It happens at some point, right? I threw my shoulder out just pushing my daughter on a swing. That's like, this is coming for you people, right? And it used to be, like I used to play a lot of cricket and I'd go and the physio would sort of sort you out and you'd be on like a 6-week regime and they give you all, electric shock treatment and all this kind of stuff just to fix you up. And these days you go to the doctor and it's just managing decline. That's all it is. It's like, have you tried paracetamol? That's it. You're sinking down into quicksand. It's all happening. It's going to happen to you, okay? There you are, sinking down into quicksand. And here comes Jesus, and the whole thing about Jesus is he claims to be Lord, right? And so he's basically saying, I'm your rescuer, I'm here to save you. And you think, fantastic. And then he jumps in, that's what Mark's Gospel is, he jumps in, and he sinks like a stone in front of you. And you think, oh. And as you think, oh, you're not just sad for Jesus at that point, are you? If your rescuer sinks like a stone in front of you, you're not just sad for your rescuer, are you? You're a little bit sad for you too, aren't you? Because you thought he was your one hope. You thought he was going to get you out, and all of a sudden he sinks like a stone in front of you. And that's what happens in Mark chapter 15. And you think he's out for the count. Jesus is not Lord. Death is Lord. Why don't we turn to page 86 and we'll see what happened next, because here's how the story keeps going. Page 86 of these books, these uncover books. And it's called The Burial of Jesus. And really, you could just think this is the burial of hope. This is the burial of joy. This is the burial of your future, right? As Jesus goes down into the grave, you just think, oh, well, that's all our destinies right there being buried. If only he could rise. If only he could rescue us. The burial of Jesus, bottom of page 86. Little number 42 means it's verse 42 of chapter 15. It was preparation day, that is the day before the Sabbath. So as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council, who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. So Joseph bought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in the linen, placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. It wasn't a case of mistaken identity. They didn't get the tomb wrong. They knew where he was laid. He was dead. He was a corpse. They knew the tomb where he was laid. And then when the Sabbath was over, that Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. See, they haven't believed a word that Jesus has said. Jesus has been predicting, look, I'm Lord. I've got this thing covered. Death is coming for me, but I'm going to take it on and I'm going to win. He'd been predicting his resurrection, but they didn't believe him. They were just going to pretty up a corpse. That's all they were doing, to honor the dead. Maybe they just thought Jesus was just a good teacher. And what do? You honor the memory of a good teacher. So they went to anoint Jesus' body very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise. They were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Don't be alarmed, he said. You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene. Isn't that great? You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene, the good teacher. You know that good teacher? You know the one from Nazareth? Said all those great things that we kind of cross-stitch onto grandma's kind of mantelpiece. You know that Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified, that very mortal, very killable guy. Remember, you're looking for him. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Their world is starting to be turned upside down. Originally they thought, yeah, maybe Jesus is the one. Maybe he's the Lord. Maybe he can defeat death. But no, they were stupid to believe that. Death has never lost a battle. Why did they think that Jesus could beat death? So they go on the Sunday morning just to anoint his body, just to honor the dead. And now their world is about to be turned upside down because apparently there's a higher power than death. Apparently Jesus has punched a hole through death and come out the other side. And apparently we can get through death too if we put our hand in Jesus. If we put our hand in Jesus' hand, he will pull us through that same trajectory. They're just starting to get it, but they don't yet understand the resurrection of Jesus at this point. I wonder about you. Where are you up to on the whole issue of Jesus? Is he just a good teacher? Or do you think he might be Lord? See, if he's Lord, it would be extraordinary if he didn't rise from the dead, right? But where are you at? Let me just give you, as I close, just 3 reasons why I believe that Jesus is Lord and not death. And therefore 3 reasons that you can trust in Jesus and call him Lord even tonight. Here are the 3 H's that I often talk about when I talk about, can you believe that Jesus really rose from the dead? The heavens, history, and him. All these things are already telling you that there is an Easter kind of a God. There is a God who defeats death. There is a life from the dead kind of a God. And the first thing to prove that to you is the heavens. We've thought about the heavens already. Let's go to the next slide. Everyone in this room already believes that everything has come from nothing. We all, whatever you believe in this room, we all believe that the universe had a kind of a beginning point. 100 years ago, perhaps we wouldn't have believed that, but that is the scientific consensus, that everything has come from nothing, which is a kind of a life from the dead kind of a miracle, don't you think? It's exactly the sort of thing that an Easter kind of a God would do. Bring everything from nothing, from the cold, dark, empty place. Life. Sounds like a resurrection to me, doesn't it? Everybody in this room believes in some kind of power of life over death, or else, what are we all doing here? I've often said, as a Christian, I believe in the virgin birth of Jesus, but what about the virgin birth of the cosmos, right? I think everybody in this room already believes in some extraordinary miracles. I believe in the virgin birth of Jesus. Everybody believes in the virgin birth of the cosmos. It's just, I happen to believe it wasn't from a virgin. I happen to believe that there was a God to effect the miracle, a God of life from the dead. The heavens are already telling you that there is a God of life from the dead. Well, the second thing under the heavens is order has come from chaos. Order has come from chaos. So, if we've come from this Big Bang, it's an incredibly well-ordered Big Bang, right? It's an incredibly well-ordered explosion. Don't know if you have ever come across a well-ordered explosion, but apparently we're living in one. It's quite extraordinary, isn't it? The fine-tuning of the cosmos is a really interesting YouTube hole that you can fall down later on tonight. Just type in fine-tuning of the cosmos and see where it takes you. But, if the expansion rate of the universe was a millionth of a billionth 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 of 1% faster, we would have flung out into heat death. But if the expansion rate was a millionth of a billionth 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 of 1% smaller, then we would have crunched back in on ourselves. But, oh gosh, we happen to be just right. Out of the chaos has come incredible order. I happen to believe that Jesus went around and brought order out of chaos. I believe that when you read through these miracles, he really did flatten that storm. I really do think he brought order out of that chaos. But everyone in this room already believes that incredible order has come out of chaos. I just happen to believe in the kind of God who can do that. So actually, I think my belief in my kind of miracles makes sense. So the heavens are already telling you that there's a life from the dead kind of a God, an Easter kind of a God. The next thing under the heavens is life from non-life. I do believe that on Easter Sunday morning, the non-living Jesus came to life. I do believe that. But actually the scientific consensus is that at some point, all life emerged from non-life, right? At some point, inorganic chemicals, at some point, began to be biology, right? Everybody believes that life came from non-life. But I happen to believe in a life from the dead kind of a God who does that kind of a thing. I think the heavens are already telling you that we're living in a life from the dead kind of universe and that there is an Easter kind of God behind it all. That's the heavens. That's one H. The second H is history. We've gone through the history with Christine. We've talked about how, yes, historians will tell you that Jesus definitely died. He was definitely laid in that tomb. They knew where that tomb was. 3 days later, that tomb was empty. The body was never discovered. And the disciples all had experiences of the risen Jesus that lasted for 40 days until they all stopped when Christians believed Jesus returned to heaven. Those are the historical facts. How do you explain them? Well, we went through why we thought the explanation that makes most sense of the historical data is just that Jesus did what he said he was going to do. He's Lord. He rose from the dead. And then history has another dimension to it as well, because from that moment of Easter Sunday, there's been an extraordinary Big Bang. There's been an extraordinary explosion. The largest sociological phenomenon the world has ever seen has exploded into life, and it's taken over the world. The church is bigger today than it was yesterday. It'll be bigger again tomorrow and bigger again the next day and bigger again the next day. It's an expanding universe. Well, you hit rewind on this expanding universe to discover when the Big Bang was. When was this explosive release of life that has absolutely turned the world upside down? When did that happen? Easter Sunday. Historically, something was injected into history that has turned this world upside down. What do you say? Christians just say, yeah, Jesus rose, just as he said he would. So there's the heavens, there's history, and then there's just him. Him. You know, kids often play that game about superheroes. They sort of say, you know, who'd win in a battle between Batman and Superman or whatever? And one kid says, I think Batman because of this. No, I think Superman because of that. And they have a fight. And it's just this imaginary clash. Well, we can do that tonight. You can just ask yourself that question. Who would win in a fight? Jesus or death? What do you reckon? Who would win in a fight? Jesus or death? Now, I know death has never lost a battle. I know death is like the 20th level super bad guy. I know that. But if you know anything about Jesus, if you've come to uncover Jesus this week, have you come to see that maybe Jesus has the measure of death? What do you think? Or has our Savior jumped into the quicksand and sunk like a stone? And are we next? Those are the options. Because no one else is coming. No one else is even promising to defeat death for us except this Jesus. But as you look at the person of Jesus, don't you see that he's Lord? Don't you see his towering charisma and his stooping love? Don't you just see him walk around planet Earth like he owns the place? Don't you just think, yeah, I think he's tops. I think he's it. I think he's ultimate reality. I think he's Lord. Bad luck. You're becoming a Christian. As you start to see that Jesus is Lord, then it has ramifications. And let me leave you with this. The ramification is this. If Jesus is Lord, it means death is not Lord. And you can put your hand into Jesus' hands, and he can save you from the physical death that is coming to us all. He can also save us from that spiritual death that you feel when you're selfish and greedy and grasping and proud. That spiritual death, that physical death, Jesus can save you from it all. And he can walk you through this valley of the shadow of death, and he can walk you out into feasting joy. That is the Christian hope, that because Jesus has risen again from the dead, he can give you his kind of life from the dead. He can give you an immortal, bodily, physical hope, feasting joy forever. But he's Lord, right? If you come to see Jesus as Lord, it means you're not Lord. You're not in charge. Of course you're not in charge. You're sinking down in the quicksand. You're not in charge. I'm not in charge. Jesus is Lord. But you know, if you see Jesus for who he is, that's the most wonderful, most joyful recognition you could possibly make. Oh, hallelujah. I'm not in charge of me anymore. I'm an idiot. I'm not in charge of me. That's good. I've sabotaged my own success and happiness better than anyone else in my life. Jesus is Lord. It's a wonderful thing to come to see. And will you come to him? Will you give him your death? And will you take from him his life? I'm just going to offer you that opportunity, even tonight, to say, Jesus, you win. I'm not Lord. You're Lord. Would you lead me through this life and into your eternity? That's all I'm going to pray. And if you want to pray along with me, you can do it quietly in your heart. Why don't we bow our heads? Let's all bow our heads just so that people can feel free to be in that moment. Because I think everybody needs to do business with these truths. Let me offer you some words that you could pray quietly in your heart to Jesus. Lord Jesus, thank you that you came. It is hard here in this dark world. But thank you that you joined us. Thank you that you took on our death. And thank you that you rose to life. Come into my life as Lord. Lead me through this dark world and into your future hope. Amen.